Hey, Jeff. Just wanted to let you know that this is our 30th episode, so I think it'd be a good idea if we reviewed some of our favorite trades leading up to this
I
milestone.
don't want to debate you. And in case you forgot, we got a packed show today. Robert Cahaly's in the green room. We just don't have time to spend talking about these old
Wait,
trades.
hold on. What do you mean we don't have
Well,
time?
if we
This is a
include those
podcast.
trades, it would just eat up too much time. I don't think the predicted traders want to.
Predicted traders ate your lunch.
Oh, shut
Predicted
up, man.
traders ate your lunch. You're a clown of a host.
You are the worst podcast producer the industry has ever
Let
seen.
me tell you something, Jeff. I am the podcast industry right now.
I think that the country would be better served if we allowed both people to speak with fewer interruptions. I'm appealing to you, sir, to do that.
Warning. The political trade features probabilities and perspectives about politicians, political parties, political outcomes, and political wagering. The political trade is rated NSFP, not safe for partisans.
The number one biggest game is with the kingdom of fame. It's like a race at the top because they wanna be boss. They don't care who they step on as long as they get along. Politicians in my eyes.
Welcome back to The Political Trade, the podcast for people with a passion for politics, probability, and profits. I'm Jeff Joseph, editorial director of Luckbox Magazine, hosting the podcast where conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, partisans and wingnuts come together to make money betting on politics by trading in the stock market for politics at predictit.org. This is the Political Trade's 30th episode, and joining us for the occasion is Robert Cahaly. Robert is the founder and chief pollster of the Trafalgar Group, a political polling and survey company based in Atlanta. He's recognized as one of the most consistently accurate pollsters in America, and the Trafalgar Group is credited with the most accurate 2016 polling in the battleground states, as well as the most accurate projection of the 2016 Electoral College vote, projecting 306 votes for Trump and 232 votes for Clinton. Of course, the actual was 304 to 227, so just 2 points off on his Electoral College prediction. Up ahead, Robert's going to shed some insights into Trafalgar Group's current projections. And then in our trade segment, we'll walk Robert into the predicted trading pits to identify the trading ideas that align with his proprietary polling results. I'm joined by Mike Reddy. Mike is the editor at Luckbox Magazine, a new prediction market trader, and the producer of The Political Trade. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Jeff.
Robert Cahaly is an interesting guest to have on because, as you know, the Political Trade podcast is sponsored by Luckbox Magazine, and Luckbox, by definition, is all about outliers. That's what we're focused on. And he is indeed an outlier in the polling community. And he's an outlier in terms of what's been some pretty outstanding performance as of late that has increased his visibility in polling space. It's Real Clear Politics in June ran an extensive story that kind of documented his overall performance in 2018 midterms, 2016 and 2018. And that's why we're looking forward to having him on. So actually, let's do that. Let's bring him on. Are you out there, Robert?
I am.
All right. Well, Robert, thank you for joining us on The Political Trade. There's been a lot of interest. We mentioned on Twitter yesterday that you were going to be on our show, and there was a lot of interest in hearing you hearing you join us. So let's get right to it. First of all, thank you again, and let's speak right to performance. So here's based on the back research.
On performance then.
Okay.
We were not off in the Electoral College. It was 306 to 232, and two Texas electors chose to vote for, one wrote for Ron Paul, and one of them voted for John Kasich. But that was what he received election night. Those electors were worthless electors and did not follow through.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're saying that you were dead on accurate on the Electoral College prediction.
Texas has 38, and it only cast 36 votes for Trump, one for Ron Paul and one for John Kasich.
Okay, well, that's quite a formidable forecast and track record. I'll add to that a little bit. Based on some of the tabulations we did, based on your published polling, and of course you publish everything on your website and your Twitter handle, and we'll be sharing that shortly as well. But it appears as though you have over 90% correct election call rating on your 5-year forecast thus far. How long have you been polling, by the way?
Well, I ran basically a political and public relations company. Started in the late '90s, and we were hiring other people to do polling, and I started getting a little more interested in how they were doing it, starting in like 2002, and started looking at learning a little bit about how surveys were done and things were weighted. And by 2008, we brought that project in-house, and we did the polling in-house. And it was no longer a vended service to our clients. We had a lot of great success in 2002, and one of our main states that we worked in, state I grew up in, was South Carolina. And in 2010, we were forecasting all of the statewide elections. We were doing a campaign for Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor, and that was the time that former Governor Cahaly was running. And we had a great track record of calling those, and we were working in Michigan that year, and we had a great track record. So we just kept stepping it up a little more. And then 2016 in the primaries, we saw a real good chance to kind of weigh in early and try to impress some people. And we did excellent job in the first few primaries and kind of got on everybody's radar screen. So come the fall, we were ready to roll out what we felt was our better mousetrap.
Well, in 2016, you clearly made a mark. You were the only pollster who called Trump to win Michigan. I pulled up the RCP. I'm sorry, say again.
Pennsylvania. The only ones that called Michigan and Pennsylvania.
Well, let's do them one at a time. In Michigan, you called Trump plus 2%, plus 2 points. The final spread, of course, was really tight, under 10,000 votes and about 0.3%. But the next closest poll to you had Clinton up 5 points. So you were way out in front of anybody being close to that contest, and the only pollster that actually called Trump to win Michigan. And then moving on to Pennsylvania, Trafalgar Group had Trump plus 1%. He ended up winning by 0.7%. The RCP average was Clinton favored by 1.9%, 2.6% away. And Morning Call, which is, of course, a very highly rated poll over at 538 and other platforms, had Clinton up 4%. So a big difference between Morning Call's final poll going into the Pennsylvania election and yours. You were about 4.7% apart. And of course, you were within 0.3% of the final outcome. So nice credit on Pennsylvania. Going back in 2017, you were the only pollster to correctly call the Georgia 6 special election. And then according to our data here, your success continued in 2018. Rather dramatically in Florida, you were one of the few pollsters whose data showed Ron DeSantis beating Andrew Gillum in Florida in the governor's race, and Rick Scott besting incumbent Democrat Bill Nelson in the Senate race that year. And of course, your call, let's say, was DeSantis plus 3. The RCP average had Gillum plus 3.6. So over 6.5 points away was the consensus RCP average from your call. And large pollers like Emerson had Gillum plus 5. Harris had Gillum plus 4. Quinnipiac had Gillum plus 7, way off from the final outcome. So again, Florida was a great state for you in 2018. Also in the midterms, you had Claire McCaskill beating Josh Hawley in the Missouri Senate race. The NBC Marist poll had McCaskill, the popular Democratic incumbent, up 3%. But at Trafalgar, you had Hawley plus 4%, and he went on to win by 6%. So as a result of all this, an RCP story in June concluded that the Trafalgar Group has emerged from the last two political cycles as one of the most accurate polling operations in America. So certainly some nice credit for you there. So tell me, where or why were the other polls so wrong in 2016?
Well, it boils down to two things. And they're both, to me, they represent an old old-fashioned way of doing this. I mean, we are an industry disruptor for a reason, and part of it is we try to recognize the real world that we live in this day and age. And these systems are based on two fundamentally flawed principles. First, the highly rated pollsters, and highly rated, I say tongue in cheek, with the people who rate pollsters and yet get elections wrong. The highly rated pollsters are the ones that use the live calls. Well, there is a thing called the social desirability bias. And when you have a candidate who a person to express that they're for that candidate to a live person, you end up with a situation where people try to say they don't feel comfortable telling someone they're for that candidate for fear of being judged for being for that candidate. It was clear in the Donald Trump race that they were called deplorables and everything else. So these live callers are going to get that wrong. It's the reason they don't measure it right, because people people want to be liked. People try to be polite. I always say, if you ask the little child with the face full of crumbs, did you eat the missing cookies? He's going to do a little calculus in his head, and he's going to admit, you don't know. No, I did not. I mean, he's not going to tell you the truth. He's going to tell you what he thinks you want to hear, that the answer will get him in the least trouble. And I don't think we get better at that when we get older. So that's a big problem. It's the reason that not only were their polls wrong, but it's the reason that the exit polls were wrong. We still see people quoting from 2016 exit polls, which, if you'll remember, had the guys in the newsrooms kind of dancing at 6 o'clock on election night, because they were all saying Hillary was going to win big. Because if you won't tell the truth on the telephone, what are the odds you're going to tell the truth to a kid with a clipboard or an iPad standing in front of you? So first is the amount of live interaction, live callers. Second,
let me before we move on, let's speak a little bit to the background there. So the notion of a social desirability bias is a bias that's been identified going back to the 1950s. Crown and Marlowe did the most comprehensive work on that in the Journal of Consulting Psychology. That was in 1960. And then more recently in 2014 over at UMass, Professor Raymond LaRaja wrote a thesis that basically said that people holding perceived unique political views are far more likely to withdraw from a political discussion and make public declarations for candidates in order to avoid the personal cost of being exposed. The concept itself that you're referring to, of the social desirability bias, has its roots in the Bradley effect, which was
absolutely
a theory which evolved from after observed discrepancies between the voter opinion polls and election outcomes where a white candidate and a non-white candidate run against each other. And it was, of course, named after Los Angeles Mayor Tom Bradley, the African-American who lost the 1982 California governor's race. Despite being ahead in voter polls going into the election, everyone thought he was going to be winning. And then there was another validation of that notion called the shy Tory factor. It's the name given by the British opinion polling companies when they first observed this phenomenon back in the early 1990s. And it was basically where there was a share of the electoral vote that was won by the Conservative Party, known colloquially as the Tory Party. It was significantly higher than the equivalent share in opinion polls. And they basically came to the explanation that these shy Tories were out there and that they were as much as 3 to 4% of the differential in 1992 and as much as 6% of the differential in 2015. YouGov, Populous, and other major polling firms in the UK have since sought to correct for this social desirability bias. So I guess that's what you're referring to when you refer to this differential that you're correcting for. We've heard you explain this as being the shy Trump voter. So that begs the question, if there was a shy Trump voter in 2016, first of all, were you able to quantify it?
Yes.
As to what percent that represented? And then the follow-up question to that would be, what do you think that looks like today in this race?
Okay. Well, let me start with my first exposure to it. I grew up in South Carolina. And growing up in South Carolina, we got a lot of bleed over from North Carolina. And so my first exposure to this concept was Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms's races that people would always say, if Jesse's only losing by 2 or 3 points, he's going to win. So, it was called the Bradley effect, the shy Trump voter. Now we always called it the Helms factor. And so it was something that I grew up understanding pretty clearly and watching it in practice in at least 2 cycles when I was, very formative. Now, the way I was taught, and I would love to say I thought of this, but I did not. There's a great fellow who did a lot of polling that I work with, and his name was Rod Sheely. He passed on a few years ago, but he was in the school of the Lee Atwaters. They were contemporaries in South Carolina and politics, and Rod was always talking about, well, you got to ask what they're when it's really controversial, ask what most of their friends and neighbors think. And then when you know it, then you look at what the difference is. And so what we were doing is we used the friends and neighbors thing. So we'd ask the ballot test, and then we would say, all right, now, how do you think most of your friends and neighbors are voting? Which side are they on? And we get that answer. And what we found across the board, Hillary always went down, Trump always went up. It was never the other way around. It was completely perfect in that ratio of 1 went down, 1 went up, and it was always Hillary down, Trump up. Now, how much of a difference depended upon the state. And so what we did is we kind of built a little formula, and what we like to do is when we put out a final poll in a race, we tend not to put undecideds on it. We make the calculations. Which of these undecideds, because at most times we've polled it many times, which of the undecideds are going to stay home and how the others are going to break, and then we integrate our philosophy of where we think those shy voters are. So, and we're going to get more into kind of how we do our surveys to avoid the social desirability effect or to minimize it. We can't avoid it completely. So, but when we do that final calculation, we put that into effect. So, for example, if we saw that in a state Hillary was dropping 4 and Trump was coming up 4, and it was almost equal. I mean, like whatever she was dropping, Trump was coming up. It was very rarely anything different than that. It wasn't where they get moving undecided. They just coming off, going up. So if she was dropping 4, Trump was coming up 4, then we'd measure that and see, what the difference was. And we built a little system that calculated those in and figured out the differential, and kind of, it was more complicated than split the difference because it had to do with a lot of the factors of who was saying it. Like we rated people. We also did that, and as we put a list together, our list of who we were calling a little different than most people because we considered what we called a Trump surge universe. And those were people who had been very unlikely to vote, but still hadn't moved and hadn't died. We came up with 57 factors that might make someone a potential Trump surge voter, and you had to have like 20 or so for us to put you in the list. So if, we found those people, they would be weighted more than somebody who was not like a surge voter, because we knew they definitely were going to lean more toward voting for Trump. But we built a calculation that we basically take the 2 numbers, put it through our little system we built, and then predict how the undecideds will break and how the final number would be.
Well, there was a lot of ruckus when we on Twitter when we mentioned that you were going to be an upcoming guest. A lot of it from partisan traders who had a strong opinion about what appears to be your polling numbers that are favoring Republicans. But there were a number of questions about understanding the methodology and trying to peer inside the black box. Recently on Predict It, which hosts a happy hour every once in a while, they had Kyle Kondik on. He's from Sabato's Crystal Ball, and he said this.
Look, I mean, this Trafalgar, they sort of swept in at the end of the 2016 election. I'd never heard of them before, and they dropped all these polls in the Midwest that showed Biden doing pretty well, showed Trump doing pretty well. Yeah. Those states were, basically tied or whatever in their polling, which essentially reflected reality. And They have said that they're trying to, they basically have some sort of method in which they kind of try to calculate what they're seeing as sort of like a shy Trump vote. I think they maybe ask people how their friends and neighbors are voting or something like that. Some people essentially look at Trafalgar and say, well, they're essentially just sort of like, they get a poll result and then they sort of, to use the term, unskew it to make it more Republican leaning. But I don't think they've been, it's not entirely clear what they're really doing.
So he acknowledges your accuracy in the prior elections, but raises the question as to what you're doing.
Well,
so maybe you can address that.
This is a level of being a little dismissed that we're expecting. I mean, he says things like kind of came in at the very last minute. Absolutely not. Again, our polls were in the primaries in 2016, so that's certainly not flying in the last minute in the fall. We published ones as early as September in 2016, again, not coming at the last minute. We published polls far outside of the Midwest, including Florida, Utah, and lots of others, so not in the Midwest. So let's undo some of the things he said that were wrong. Remind people that the Larry Sabato crystal ball said Hillary was going to win. Make sure everybody knows that context. And I guess the first answer is, when you built them out of mousetrap, we've told you as much as we're going to tell you, because we told about the neighbor question, and all of a sudden we see companies using that. So we're not even going to make that mistake again. Now, listen, I see that some traders are mad and they don't like what we're doing, but then bet against us. I mean, this is very simple. This polling ought to be a meritocracy. It ought to be, if you get it right, you continue to do the business. And if you constantly get it wrong, you're out of the business. But that is not the way it works, because people poll with agendas. Our agenda is getting it right. And people can say we're very pro-Republican, but how does that explain how strongly we came out for suggesting that Manchin and Tester and Stabenow and Evers were going to win in 2018? We did predict quite a few Democrats were going to win, because there was actually, in the case of Stabenow's race, there was a social desirability bias pro-John James. People who weren't going to vote for him, who were saying they're going to vote for him. So it isn't a partisan thing for us. I mean, we might come from a Republican background, but I can assure you, I care a lot more about getting this stuff right, because we do these things that we publish at our cost. We don't have published anything on Real Clear that we didn't pay for. We may sell a question or two, but the ballot test, that's what we pay for. And if we do it for an organization, we don't give it to RCP. And the reason we do this is business development, because people hire you when they think you get it right. So I have no incentive to push some stupid party agenda. I don't get paid by a bloated party apparatus. I don't get paid by the campaign.
Well, I think the irony of traders that might make that accusation is that polling looks on the surface to be a lot like trading. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are. It only matters what your results are. So
right.
That's, either you were accurate or you weren't. Either you're a successful trader or you're not. So,
and we're not going to tell everybody how we do everything. We're just not. I mean, I remember in 2016, I said, you know what my goal is? My goal is to do this well enough that when somebody says, what's your methodology? I'm allowed to say, none of your damn business.
Well, at the same point, you are challenging. You called out in September, on September 4th on Twitter, you called out Nate Silver with a challenge. You basically told Nate over at 538 that you were willing to put up $10,000 against his $10,000, naming the charity as a beneficiary, a COVID relief charity as a beneficiary, as to whoever had the most accurate electoral and state projections. What was the response to that?
Well, Nate, to his credit, he did respond. He said he wasn't allowed to bet. I realize Nate has corporate masters at ABC and therefore Disney, and I respect that. I mean, that's who he works for. I work for me. So I don't have to ask anybody's permission.
Is that offer still out there? Would you still put it out to other pollsters?
Here's the thing. I would put it out to other pollsters who are nationally recognized and poll multiple states. So pretty much, if you're on Real Clear Politics and you poll multiple states and you're any of the news outlets, yeah, it's like, the first one to take me up will do it. I'd come back to Nate and say, how about this, Nate? we'll figure out what the date needs to be. Maybe we'll say it'll be that Sunday night. Whatever it is, your final predictions. If he still want to do it, I will put the $10,000 up for Nate. And all he has to do, if he's wrong, is wear an Atlanta Braves hat on TV and tell people that I don't deserve to be rated a C+ anymore. But he's going to have to wear a Braves hat.
He's going to have to wear a Braves hat.
Is.
All right. Well, there's an open offer out to Nate Silver.
Because, Nate is a fellow sports fan, and he's a fan of the Detroit Tigers, and I got to say, a special place in my heart for them too. But, so like I said, it's nothing personal. And actually, I think he's an incredible statistician. What I think we fundamentally disagree on is that I don't think he believes people lie to pollsters. I do.
Well, let's go back to a question I asked earlier, which was to quantify. If you were to look back and say, okay, in 2016, in the general election, we quantified the shy Trump voter effect, which is a more contemporary designation of the social desirability bias, at what percent?
It was different in every state.
And what was the range?
But the difference in what they were saying was between 3 and 9. We found the difference to be in what we predicted was between 3 and 7.
And how would you compare that then to 2020?
Well, let's look at it this way. In 2016, it was awful when Hillary Clinton said that Trump voters were despicable. That was a terrible name to call them. Now let's consider, are the names worse in 2020? I think they are. I think they're white supremacists, sexist, racist, homophobic, everything you can think of. So, and in 2020, have people been more shamed and doxxed and hounded and harassed for their political opinions? Yes, they have. So do I think the effect is here? Yes, and I think it's a lot bigger than anybody realizes. I think there are a lot of people in this country, and we hear from them all the time, who say, I'm not saying anything at work. I'm not saying anything on social media. I'm not telling anybody that I don't know really well what I think, but I'm going to vote. I'm not going to want to be one of those people who gets attacked and lose their job because I say that I'm for the president. I hear it all the time. And let me go to something that's important. Florida. Florida is a great case study in 2018 because there was not a social desirability bias at all in the U.S. Senate race. And there was a significant one in the race for governor. It's not every race that these appear into. And so with Gillum, people felt like the more politically correct answer would be say they were voting for him. But we found if you said you were for Scott, you were for Scott. If you said you were for Nelson, you were for Nelson. So it's not every race. It is, you find this effect when people feel like they're going to be judged for saying something different. We also find this effect on what people say about how they really feel about COVID, how they really feel about the Black Lives Matter organization versus the phrase. The phrase is universally popular. The organization, not so much.
Okay, well, understood, Robert. So let's peel back let's open up that black box a little bit and try to get a better understanding then of how you correct for this social desirability bias. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I want to go back. I want to go to the second thing because we had talked about the first was social desirability because the next one comes into it. And the next one is about these ridiculously long surveys. Because part of correcting social desirability bias is getting regular people to take your polls. And we live in a day and age where people have lives. They're busy. And when I see these polls that are 30 and 40 questions, 60 questions, 70 questions, 108 questions, I have one simple question. Who's taking these polls? Do you know anybody who's got 25 minutes to be interrupted on a Tuesday night? No. So what you have in those circumstances are when they do use regular voters, they find a voter that cares way too much. They talk about low information voters win elections. Well, if you got that much time to talk about politics, you ain't low information anymore. You probably got too much information. And you care too much, you're too liberal, you're too conservative. So they're not getting regular people. Or, and this is the worst thing, They're using pools of people who have agreed to be survey takers, which are not the least bit full of average people. They're full of people who think a cool thing to do to make a little money on the side is to be a survey taker. So that's why they're not getting representative people. So one, you've got to get to regular people, and you got to give them the survey quick and give them lots of ways to take it. And one of the things we love is one of the couple of methods we use are texts and emails. And if you get the text or email at 4 o'clock, I don't care if you don't start responding till 9. I don't care if you don't finish responding till the next morning. You got a few days. So you do it at your convenience, which is, I think, it's essentially important, and it feels more anonymous. So the first way you start compensating is regular people. The second way is you provide people as anonymous as possible ways to give the information. And whether that's a text or an email or an automated call or a live caller who goes out of their way to make it clear how anonymous the poll is, or other digital methods that we consider proprietary, we try to give people the comfort that this is anonymous and that it's a real poll, because that's what they're nervous about. Is this real? Am I on the other end of, somebody's going to put a list out of what people said? So we always give away to link anything that's delivered digitally. I'll give them away to link to our website and Twitter and say, hey, this is a real polling company. You can check us out. We even have a line on there that says, this is the real poll. You don't get a goofy prize to take it. Check us out. So we try to give people a sense that, one, it's real. Two, we take your privacy seriously. We want your honest opinions. We all know somebody that has that Facebook account that has the pictures they put with their children on it. It's just proper and perfect, and you never say anything inappropriate. And then a lot of those people have another Facebook account that they kind of troll on. Well, the one they troll on is what their real opinions are, and that's what I'm trying to get to. That's the person I want to interview, is the person that runs their troll account, not the one that runs their perfect little family picture Facebook account, because that's what they really think. So a lot of it's trying to get to them, and it's not perfect, because anytime somebody has to say, I'm for X versus Y candidate, or press a button, I'm for X versus Y, or text or whatever, they're still running the risk that they're telling that to somebody who may use it against them, and they're scared. And add to that, Republicans are 4-1 or 5-1, depending upon the state, less likely to participate in a poll.
Why is that?
Because they don't believe in them. They don't know, again, why you're asking. I mean, we have seen people have their opinions thrown at them. So a lot of Republicans are antsy. Who are you? Why are you calling me? Are you really with a polling company? Or am I going to be on a list? Am I going to be on some website tomorrow because I said I'm not, I'm supporting Trump? I just ask people, use good logic. Just get out of get out of all the media spin and think about it. Do you know somebody who lives in a really fancy neighborhood who you know is for Trump? Do you think that person would be comfortable putting a yard sign in their yard in that neighborhood? And in most America, the answer is no. And do you think that person who maybe drives into a big city and parks their car would be comfortable having Trump sticker on their car? And most of the time, the answer is no. And I'm saying, what do you think when they get a call from a live person on a Tuesday night that says, hello, Ms. Jameson, my name is Todd Jones, and we're doing a political survey, Ms. Jameson, and are you for Biden or are you for Trump? Do you think she's going to say Trump? There's no way she's going to say Trump.
Well, doesn't that imply then that live calls will, since they're not anonymous, or they have less perception of anonymity, let's put it that way, then they become least effective if you're trying to correct for social desirability bias?
Yes. So the sacred cow of the polling establishment is the sour meat. Exactly. So the thing you get an A for doing on the rating groups that lose elections is the thing that is actually worst.
So that leaves what? If you throw out live calling, that leaves IVR polling.
You have to do live calling differently. And again, I'm not going to tell everybody how we do it.
Sure.
But you have to. And the other thing is, how many people under 40 do you think you get calling on their home or on their cell phone? They don't answer the phone. If they don't know it, you got to get to those people with text, email, digital. You're underrepresenting them, and you're skewing their numbers. You have to get to people based on the way the world works now. I mean, we all have some friend that's in their 20s or 30s who literally is not capable of making a phone call, but they're capable of texting the Unabomber's manifesto in less time than you could say, "Can you come to the garage?" Because that's the way they grew up. They text everything. So maybe you should text them their polls. I mean, it's just recognize the world's changing.
All right. So if you were to break out the different polling mechanisms or platforms that are out there, you have live call polling. There's IVR polling, which is interactive voice response. There's text polling, emails, proprietary digital platforms. What would the distribution of your polling look like among those 5 different channels?
It depends on what we have to have in a given poll to get what we need. We break down an entire race. We create a list of what we need. I got to have geographic diversity. I have to have ethnic diversity. I have to have a voter history diversity. I have to have educational history diversity. I have to have diversity of income. I have to have, every different thing we can. And so I'll look at, and what we'll do is we'll run a night or two, and we'll come back and we'll say, all right, we kind of ran a mix on all the platforms. We'll say, all right, where are we weak? And they're like, you know what? We did really good on this, but we are not doing good. We're very low between 18 and 35s, and we had 18 to 35s going crazy good on text. So we'll do more 18 to 35s. And if we needed more 18 to 35s in this particular part of the state, well, it is about doing as little weighting as possible. Weighting is the process when polling goes through and they take a smaller sample and they blow it up or shrink it down to fit the number it should fit. So the better your poll is, the less you have to weight. And so it might be that a particular poll, hey, you know what, between live calls and emails, we were good. But most of the time, it's a nice mix, and it just depends on who you need more of. So it's not a set amount because, again, that's like saying my goal is to go to the grocery store and setting the amount and bring back some milk and saying, and I'm going to drive 10 miles tonight. Well, the grocery store might be closed. You might have to drive to another one. It might be 12. It's setting it based on the result, not based on the process.
We let our listeners know that you were going to be on, and we received a question from one of our listeners, Jonathan Zubkov, and he asked 2 questions. So what is the exact number of points that Trafalgar adds to Trump to account for the shy Trump effect? I think you've answered that already, but you can address that.
0. We don't add anything to Trump's vote. That is a misnomer. I mean, let's remember something else. There are a lot of polling companies and pundits who got embarrassed in 2016. And they really don't like us very much. And they put a lot of crap out there about us and say stuff like that. We're having to correct websites all the time. And, we've had a couple we had to send a nice little cease and desist letter to and say, hey, you got to quit misrepresenting what we do. And so it's not his fault. He's probably heard that we add some votes for Trump. That is not what we do. 1, we try to minimize the social desirability effect and minimize the fact that a lot of average people get missed with our methodology. We can't eliminate it. But in the last poll of a cycle, we will eliminate the undecided, figure out which portion of them are not going to vote at all, and then reattribute the undecideds as a projection of where they're going to fall. So we never assign people to Trump.
The second part of his question was, why would there be a shy Trump effect for IVR polls?
Again, that's a very good question, and IVR has the smallest of any of them. But think about this. Well, first of all, IVR requires home lines. My daddy is 80 years old, and he don't answer his home line. So I'm not a big believer in home lines. All right, so IVR doesn't have a lot of it, but again, how does somebody know that poll, that automated thing is from a campaign? How do they know they didn't just get signed up for something? I mean, you'd be surprised at what people believe. There are people believe that when you get one of those polls, if you say Trump or Biden, you're going to get a bunch of emails for them. You would not believe the stuff we hear from people. They don't, well, I just don't want to get a bunch of things in the mail if I say that. I literally had a guy who said, well, if I take a poll, I'm going to end up getting jury duty. I'm like, no, that's not right. but I mean, it's just people that they just don't understand. I think it's very minimal on the IVR. But IVR is predominantly legally, it's got to be home lines, and I'm just not a big believer in home lines anymore.
Well, that was a good look inside your black box, which still remains a little bit black, but we have as it should be. I get it. I understand. And we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to walk you into the trading pits for what will be your very first time in Predicted's trading pits. And what we want to see is how your current projections in the battleground states match up with current market pricings. So we'll ask you to update us on your polling in the battleground states and apply them to opportunities in the predicted markets today. So we'll find that out in just a minute. But first,
want a little more luck in your life? Get Luckbox, the control freak's guide to life, money, and probability, named the best new magazine of 2019. Luckbox is a must-read for side hustlers, gamblers, entrepreneurs, and active investors. Each issue features best bets from prediction market experts, as well as timely sports wagering, stocks, options, futures, and cryptocurrency trading ideas. You can buy Luckbox on newsstands, but with this special offer, listeners of the Political Trade can receive a 10-issue digital subscription absolutely free. Just visit getluckbox.com to receive the award-winning magazine right in your inbox. Don't rely on luck. Get Luckbox for free today. Learn more at getluckbox.com.
Welcome back to the Political Trade with our special guest, pollster Robert Cahaly. And to get the most out of this segment, our trade segment, open up predictit.org, click on the Markets tab, which is top left, follow along, and as always, leave your political ideologies at the door. And remember, listeners, when we talk about a contract's price on Predictit, it's synonymous with what the market forecasts the probability of that specific outcome to be. So a contract trading at 17 cents implies a 17% probability of that outcome. So we have a lot to cover here because we're going to not only walk through the trading pits at Predictit and go into different markets, but we also want to hear what Trafalgar Group is showing in the polling on those markets. So let's start with the very first state. I think we're going to look at 4 swing states, a couple Senate races, 3 additional markets, and then coming up later, the Luckbox Longshot trade of the episode. But let's start it off. We're going to start with the swing states. Robert, what state do you want to visit first?
Let's talk about Florida, because everybody likes to talk about Florida.
All right, so the predicted question is, which party will win Florida in the 2020 presidential election? It's a hot market, over 2 million shares traded already in that market. The RCP average has Biden up 1.1%. 538 has Biden up 2.3%. Of course, in 2016, Trump won Florida with 49% of the vote to Clinton's 47.8%. It was a narrow victory. We're looking at current pricing, which has shifted materially in the last couple of days as a result of both coronavirus and post-debate. Current market pricing has the Republicans at 48 cents, and the Democrats have taken the lead in Florida at 56 cents. That's how it looks on Predictit. How does it look to you?
I can tell you this. I would buy Florida because I don't think there's any chance Donald Trump's losing Florida.
So we have a buy on Florida. So what is your polling telling us? What's your most recent poll in Florida say?
Was a while back, and it had him up 3. And then NBC came back after we were roundly criticized for saying he was winning by 3, and they said even. And then ABC came back last week and said 4 points. And if ABC is saying 4 points, it's even better than that. So I don't think that, from what I can see, both where Trump is strong, he has done a lot of things to convert a lot of Floridians. His numbers are exceptional with the Hispanics that are Cuban, the Hispanics that are Venezuelan. His numbers in the Jewish community have skyrocketed, and his numbers among the conservative base have remained intact. I do not see a scenario in which Trump loses Florida.
Florida looks like a toss-up state in the prediction markets. As we said, the Democrats are leading that state, having just flipped over as a result of both the coronavirus reports today of Trump and Melania having contracted the virus, and as a result of post-debate movement in the market. But you have a high conviction on Florida. How high is this of a conviction trade for you?
I would say of all the battleground states that are truly battleground states, Florida is the one I'm most confident he will win.
Can you break it down a little bit more? You spoke to the Hispanic vote. Are you tracking the African American vote as well?
Yes, I can speak to that kind of everywhere. But what we're generally finding is high teens for Trump on the African American vote. Florida, he's actually over 50% with the Hispanic vote. But remember, Hispanic in Florida is a mix of people from Latin America, people from Puerto Rico, people from Venezuela, that Latin America, but are also from an area where there is socialism, communism, and Cuba, and so and they do not see things the same way. But we see generally Trump above 35. With Hispanics, Florida is an exception because of the diversity of the Hispanic crowd there, and he's at above 50. But I see Trump consistently in the teens with the African American vote, and never see Biden above 80 with African American vote. Never see Biden above 60 with the Hispanic vote.
Well, that would be a material movement. I believe nationally, the African American vote in the general election was it 6% or 8%?
That was based on flawed exit polls. He did better than 10% in 2016. But again, if you won't tell the truth on the phone, you ain't telling the truth to the kid with the clipboard.
All right. Well, we have a strong call from you on your very first trade in Florida. We're going to move into the next market you've asked us to take a look at, which is North Carolina. Question is, which party will win North Carolina in the 2020 presidential election? About 1 million shares traded there. Currently, the Democrats are well in front at 60 cents. Republicans are at 44 cents. When we look at the RCP average, Biden is up about 0.5%. It's close. 538 has Biden in front by 1.3%. And of course, this was a close state in 2016. Trump won by 49% and to Clinton's 46%. So a much wider margin in North Carolina. But it's showing as a toss-up state now. And how do you call it?
Republican. I can't tell you the Republican governor is going to win, and I can't tell you Tillis is going to win, but I believe Trump's going to win, and I believe he might win by enough margin to pull some of the others up.
Any more narrow data in the state that you can speak to? The
again,
underlying data?
Same pattern with African American voters and Hispanics. Hispanics in the mid 30s, African Americans in the high teens, and North Carolina is a very interesting place. You have this research triangle area, Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. You have the Asheville kind of area, and you got pockets of very, very committed left of center. And but it's also you look at a place like Charlotte, and I mean it's a banking. It's a very white collar banking town, and it's also home of NASCAR. So North Carolina has a lot of ideological diversity, and a lot less certainly less political consensus than any southern state.
Well, let's move up north a little bit. We're going to go into the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Again, this is a market that RCP has Biden in front by 5.7%. At 538, Biden is in front by 5.8%, so pretty close. Trump won with 48.2% of the vote to Clinton's 47.5% in 2016. Almost 2 million shares traded in Pennsylvania unpredicted. Democrats are way out in front at 74 cents today. Republicans at 30 cents. What say you?
I say it's a buy for Republicans, and let me tell you why. We've done 2 polls in Pennsylvania Both of them, Trump was down by about 2 points. But what I found in the undecideds was people, we asked some additional questions. People who very much like fracking, very much wanted a strict constructionist, conservative Supreme Court judge, and felt very strongly about the defund the police efforts. And so when I saw that over 70% of the undecideds fell into one category, I think obviously we have a lack of participation among Trump, among Republicans anyway. I see those people in the undecideds, and then I see people who say they're for Biden who answer every other question like they ain't for Biden. So my gut is I think Pennsylvania is going to go Republican, and it's a great return on your investment to get in Pennsylvania.
It's a big return with Republicans sitting at 30 cents. You spoke to the undecideds. How would you quantify that number in Pennsylvania right now?
I think the real undecided number is probably 2.5, and I think that 3/4 of them will end up with Trump. That they're just not quite there yet. I mean, what is happening with Trump is there are a lot of voters who don't like him, and what is happening around them is giving a reason to hold their nose and vote for him. I mean, that's what this campaign is about, is finding a reason for some people who don't like him personally, but kind of like the results, kind of like the economy that we had. They kind of like the law and order approach. They kind of like what they see as a more reasonable approach to COVID, and they're more aligned with where Trump is. And some aren't ready to say they're for him. But like I said, I can see people who said they're for Biden that I know they're not. But if they say they're for Biden, I'm going to report they said they're for Biden. But I don't think in the end they're going to end up voting for him. So I think it's going to be a big fight. It's going to be real close. But I think the Republicans probably pull that one out.
Well, let's move up further north into the Midwest and tell me how that plays in Wisconsin. So, which party will win the Wisconsin in the 2020 presidential election? In that market, we have 1.5 million shares traded already. RCP has Biden up 5.5. 538 has Biden up 7.1. In 2016, Trump won that state as well by about a 1% margin. The pricing is heavily in favor of the Democrats at 75 cents to the Republicans 28 cents. What's your call?
This is going to be the one that if I'm wrong, it's the one I'm going to be wrong on. But I've been in Wisconsin polling. I think I've done 7 already. I know why Trump had a little dip, and I think he'll end up winning. And I know there's a significant hidden vote in Wisconsin.
Quantify it? Do you have a number?
I would tell you the hidden vote in Wisconsin is going to be north of 6%. There are some angry people in Wisconsin. And after what happened in Kenosha, there are a lot of angry people, and they just don't like this kind of mayhem.
Well, we've just walked through 4 of the key swing states, so I think I know where this is trending for some of the remaining markets we're talking about. You just put Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Wisconsin in the red column in the Electoral College, and that probably would be enough to tip this election to the incumbent, to President Trump. But let's take a look at Senate races now. Which Georgia GOP Senate special election candidate will win the most first-round votes? It's an interesting race. This is Kelly Loeffler against Doug Collins. Of course, in December 2019, Governor Brian Kemp selected Kelly Loeffler as the successor to Senator Johnny Isakson, who announced his intention to resign at the end of 2019. That was for health reasons back then. She assumed office back in January 2020. And of course, Doug Collins has served as the U.S. representative for Georgia's 9th congressional district since going back to 2013. So in that state, we have Kelly Loeffler currently at 60 cents out in front of Doug Collins, who is at 42 cents. Who wins the Senate special election?
Well, I would have told you when the whole Wall Street scandal started that she couldn't win, but she seemed to have answered that well. And the other thing we've been pulling a lot of is politics and sports. And whether they liked it or not, her stand on the WNBA is all you hear about when you poll people. It has literally put her on a rocket ship to win in this race.
Kelly Loeffler.
Because there is such an, I mean, the opinions on politics and sports are very strong. And she definitely, I think she won the election when she did that. I do not think there's any way Collins is going to surpass her.
So you have Kelly Loeffler in Georgia. And of course, you're referring to the Wall Street scandal or potential scandal, which seemed to have dissipated, was that there were 4 senators that had made material changes, lightening up their portfolio as a result of some investigative committee's briefing that they received on the coronavirus. And then they subsequently went and told their brokers or their money managers to... That was the accusation, right, to reduce their holdings. And it's true, Kelly Loeffler came out of that. I knew that would have no legs because you have to keep in mind her husband is Jeff Sprecher, who is the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. And if anybody's going to have an airtight insider trading protocol, it's going to be the wife of the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange. There is no way that they are going to make a mistake so fundamental as insider trading. So the notion of having...
saw it coming. I was supposed to go on a business trip to China the first week in February. So I've been watching this virus all along. I was already divesting in things that I thought we were going into lockdown, and I never had a private briefing. All you had to do is be paying attention.
Yeah. So we have one more Senate election. It's the Senate election in Michigan in 2020. The question is, which party will win the U.S. Senate election? We have Democrats at 77 cents. Republicans are at 24 cents. The Democratic incumbent there is Gary Peters. He's facing off against Republican challenger John James. Peters has been a U.S. Senator in Michigan since 2015, and James was the Republican candidate for the 2018 Senate election in Michigan, but lost to Debbie Stabenow, which is a race that you called in Stabenow's favor. What can you tell us about that race? Who will win the U.S. Senate election in Michigan?
Well, as I explained to a Michigan reporter yesterday, Debbie Stabenow is a powerful personality. She's a force. Gary Peters is not. I think this is, of all the tight Senate races, including incumbents, I think this is the best chance. You'll notice I didn't put a lot of Senate races on this card, but I put this one on there because I think John James is different than all the other races, and we've measured them, in that John James is not symbiotic to how Trump does. Trump can lose Michigan by a point and John James win. There's a group of people who are voting for John James that are not necessarily Trump voters, and I think it's because he is not completely dependent. Now, and I think people voting for Trump are going to end up with John James, 99%. But I see a lot of energy, and just on the personality front, I mean, there's something, we've seen this a couple times in states where somebody runs and loses one and then comes back and wins the second one. And I feel like John James I am more confident about this challenger than I am the incumbents in North Carolina and Arizona, although I think they have a chance now.
Well, with John James trading at 24 cents, that's a strong play with a nice return. What about the African American vote in Michigan? What can you tell us there?
Very strong for Trump. I think last look at it was 18. Doing very well there, and there are the percentage of Republicans who are not for Trump. The kind of the Romney types. Remember, Michigan is a home state for Mitt Romney. The Romney kind of never Trump Republicans do not feel that way about John James. So he inherits the pro-Trump and the never Trump Republicans.
Okay, well, you've called a lot of swing states, so we're going to move into the Electoral College as our next market right now, and that is, what will the Electoral College margin of victory be in the 2020 presidential election? This, of course, is a bracketed market. There's 16 brackets. That means 16 underlying choices, 8 of them for Democrats, 8 for the Republicans. If you add all the Republican brackets, you'd pay about 46 cents. If you add all the Democratic brackets, you'd pay around 82 cents. So there's a heavy favoritism to the Democratic side of the Electoral College, calling, of course, a Biden victory in the Electoral College. The brackets start at B1, they go to B16, and this specifically is the question of margin of victory in the Electoral College. What do you see that margin to be?
I see it to be 30 to 59 GOP.
30 to 59 GOP. That is, that's bracket B6, and it is trading at 6 cents. So obviously there's a huge return potential there if that were to come in. You nailed, as you reminded us in 2016. You were dead on accurate with the Electoral College vote in 2016, actually down to the vote, if we correct for the disclaimer that you provided or the information that you provided.
Because I wonder how they do it here. Is it the Electoral College votes they earn or the ones they get?
It'll be the ones that they get, I'm certain. That will be the final decider. And of course, if you're listening to this and you're interested in this play, you're probably at a lot of cushion if you take the brackets on either side and take a look at B5 and B7 as well,
Absolutely.
Which of course would give you a wider margin of victory. But this is a very interesting long shot call. But more importantly, you are the outlier that we thought you were going to be when we invited you on this broadcast. You have the GOP winning the Electoral College by between 30 and 59 votes. It leads us to another question, which I'm really interested in because I have a real fondness for the plight of the third parties in American politics, and that is the next market. What percentage of the presidential vote will not be for the two major parties? This is a market that has a lot of opportunities because among all the 13 brackets that are represented, they're very narrow. They're usually as much as a half a percentage point apart. For example, B4, which is the bracket with the most votes right now, is trading at 21 cents. And that implies that the third parties, so in other words, excluding the Democratic and Republican vote for president, B4 says that 1.5% to 2% will be the popular vote earned by non-Democrat and non-Republican votes. That trades at 21 cents. We've asked you to take a look at this market specifically. And what say you?
B7, 3% to 3.5.
3% to 3.5. Last year, well, in 2016, Gary Johnson received 3.27% of the popular vote alone. When you added the Independent and Green Party, we got up to 5% in that election. But you think that number will come down materially, down to 3 to 3.5%. So what are you seeing right now on third party voting?
Well, first of all, the last election, people really hated both candidates that voted. A lot of them did. This election, I think both sides are so and they really weren't sure who was. I mean, people pretty much thought Hillary was going to win. So there were people who, just figured Trump could win. They cast their vote somewhere else. I think there's a real fear among people that this thing is going to be close, and they don't want to vote. They don't want to see their vote go not toward getting a winner. And I'm seeing these numbers. And I also, when we do poll these states, I look at the numbers, and I think have Jorgensen, I believe last time I heard, is now qualified for all 50 ballots. And
she has.
Almost every time I see Jorgensen, I can look through some of her voters and find people that I don't think will end up voting for Jorgensen. Just because of things other positions they take and their voter history they just kind of feel like maybe they'll be judged less harshly if they say that. So I just feel like it's going to be minimized this time. This is kind of a fight for the ages, and I think everybody wants to be on one of the two sides.
Well, thank you, Robert. These were some great picks with some really strong payouts if your numbers are going to be right, and if you're going to repeat as you did in 2016 and in the midterms as well. And for the listeners, if you're not already trading on Predictit, we do have $20 for you. You can take advantage of the trades shared by Robert by going to predictit.org/promo/TPT20. Sign up, deposit $20. We'll match that first $20 that you deposited. That's predictit.org/promo/TPT20. Deposit 20. You'll have 40 to trade with. It's that simple to sign up and trade along. And we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to take a look at this week's Luckbox Longshot trade. We asked a specific question for Robert. We're going to be right back with his answer. And we're back with Robert Cahaly for our final segment, the Luckbox Longshot. Unlike our usual Luckbox Lockbox segment, when we talk about a long shot, we're focusing on low-priced contracts with plenty of upside potential. So we asked Robert to come up with a long shot trade for us, and he's come up with a couple in the trade segment previously, but he directed us to the market, which state will be won by the smallest margin in the presidential election. Which state will be won by the smallest margin? There's almost 3 million shares traded there. And there's about 12 different options. In front is Florida. Everyone remembers how tight Florida was in 2016. So that's leading the pack at 13 cents. North Carolina is at 12 cents. Georgia's at 12 cents. But you don't have a front runner there. Robert, what's your pick?
My pick, and for a lot of reasons, is I think Colorado is going to shock some people.
Well, let's hear the reasons.
Well, I think there are some issues that are going to come to the forefront that I'm not going to get into that have yet to kind of explode in Colorado that are on their way. But I would also say that I believe that Gardner is going to run a very competitive race for Senate. And I believe they're going to also really be able to bring the Second Amendment into Colorado, and it is a pretty strong Second Amendment state. And there's a lot of pockets out there in some of the things that I have been made privy to of a lot of people who are unhappy with it, that way things are going there. And I think that's going to be, I'm going to call that my little surprise. I think Colorado's going to surprise people. And it might be a lot more competitive than anybody thinks.
Well, it's a big surprise as far as long shots go. Colorado trades at around 3 cents today, which implies, a 33-1 return. And it wasn't pretty tight in 2016. Clinton had 48% of the vote to Trump's 43%. Gary Johnson had a really strong showing in Colorado in 2016.
Yes, he did.
5.2%. So what specifically will get us a little tighter this time?
Well, I think, one, Gary Johnson was a much more known quantity as a libertarian. And I just have reason to believe that a lot of that Gary Johnson vote is probably going to end up for Trump this time. And that's all I'm really going to say about that.
All right. Well, with 3 cents being laid out, that does allow you in this market to put a little bit more money to work and maybe, invest a little bit more to increase your opportunity on the payout. So if you were to look at perhaps your second and third picks, let me ask you what those would be. Of course, in 2016, Michigan had the tightest margin of victory. It was 0.3%. We all remember the less than 10,000 votes that separated Trump and Clinton in that race. New Hampshire was 0.4%. A difference of 2,700 votes, but of course, a much smaller population. Wisconsin was a 1% differential of 27,000 votes. So Colorado is your first choice, but what other state or one or two states would you add into the mix here?
I would go with Minnesota and Nevada.
Minnesota and Nevada. Minnesota trading at 5 cents, Nevada trading at 4 cents. Minnesota was the sixth closest state in 2016, had a 1.5% differential of 44,000 votes, and Nevada had 26,000 votes separating Clinton and Trump with a 2.4% differential. So what would make them tighter states this time around?
Nevada was a function of some of the union voters really didn't believe that Trump would be as pro-union as he turned out to be. And I think some of them are reevaluating the fact they were so unilaterally on Hillary Clinton's side. Minnesota, Minnesota and St. Paul are not Minneapolis. And they bet, as they say down south, they bet had all they want in Minneapolis. And I think they want to do something different.
All right. Well, you certainly came through in terms of a long shot trade for us. And overall, really, we want to thank you for coming on. It was really great to have you on.
And I want to throw one thing in Colorado that you might find interesting.
Please.
Colorado, I think, because of their exceptional history with mail-in ballots, in a lot of states, expanding mail-in ballots is not necessarily going to correspond immediately to more genuine voter participation. Colorado's experience with mail-in ballots has been a very successful one. They've tested it, and so widening the idea of new participants, I've seen around the country that people that are going to vote in this election who haven't voted in 10 years, those people favor Trump in the mid-60s in almost every state. And so I think that participation is not going to come at the cost of additional voter fraud, where I think it is going to result in additional voter fraud in a lot of places. And so that's another reason I think that they're going to increase their participation, but not at the same ratio of increasing their likelihood of voter fraud.
So that mail-in ballots are actually enabling an increased Trump vote in the state.
Right. Because Colorado just has a good system in place, much like Oregon, much like Utah. They know what they're doing. I mean, the difference between a mail-in ballot with a system that knows who's registered voters and that constantly keeps their system clean and make sure the addresses are all right, that's a more secure mail-in ballot. But these unrequested mail-in ballots that are just sent to people without scrubbing the voter list for deaths and moves, that's where your potential for voter fraud gets high. I love absentee voting. I think there's nothing more secure than if you request a ballot and you send something to your address, you fill out a form, they send it back to your address, and you send it back. That's more secure, in my experience, than voting at the poll. There's a beautiful paper trail to back up that was done legitimately. But unrequested absentee ballots, that's a little scary.
Well, we shall see. I think that's what everyone's looking to see, is what the true impact of absentee voting is going to be and mail-in ballots. So that postmortem will be coming shortly. But you've given us some great ideas. Again, we want to thank you for coming on. Again, we knew that you were an outlier, that you were putting up numbers that were very, very different from the rest of the polling industry. I think we have a better feeling for why that's the case. And we're going to be watching your suggestions and your trades very, very closely, Robert.
Well, it was obviously great. The more I've learned about what you guys are doing, it's fascinating. I love that there's a market based on this, because what I love about a market is a market rewards success and not failure. And unfortunately, the political mainstream rewards polls that are agenda-driven polls. So you people look at polls for accurate information, which makes it a meritocracy. And that's the kind of world I want to live in.
And people can follow your world by pulling you up on Twitter, Robert Cahaly, which is Cahaly, and also at Trafalgar_group are your two Twitter handles, Robert Cahaly and Trafalgar_group. Also, you have a website, the trafalgargroup.org, which you put up all your polling as well. But I've noticed that your polling comes up pretty much in real time with updates on your Twitter feed. So that's probably the best place to keep an eye on you. Anything else you want to add?
Nope, just honor being here. You guys are great. I'm happy to be an outlier, happy to be a disruptor, and we'll see what happens this year.
Terrific, Robert. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys. You got a great show.
Well, thanks again for listening to this episode of The Political Trade. We do have some announcements. We have a very special guest coming up on our next episode, and this is the founder of trading brokerage firm Thinkorswim, the co-founder of Tasty Trade, the host of the Truth or Skepticism podcast, along with Dylan Radigan, a prior guest. The legendary options trader Tom Sosnoff will be a guest on the next Political Trade. Tom is one of the most accomplished traders, putting his own money to work on a daily basis and bringing tens of thousands of active investors along for the ride each day on the Tasty Trade network, where Tom has up to 8 hours of original programming and market analysis and market trading and instruction and education. And he's been doing that for 10 years. Tom has been following the prediction markets closely for several years and will bring decades of trading experience to the Political Trade when he shares his insights with us next week. So we're really looking forward to having him up on the show next time. And that's going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Political Trade. Tell your friends about us and make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Also check out our website, thepoliticaltrade.com, to sign up for our newsletter, send us questions, find us on social media. It's all there at thepoliticaltrade.com. So thanks again for joining us today. I'm Jeff Joseph.
And I'm Mike Reddy.
And remember to believe in math, master your trade, and join us next time on The Political Trade.
You're a clown of a host.
You are the worst podcast producer the industry has ever seen.